The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.
And you're very welcome to the RTÉ Rugby Podcast as Andy Farrell names his Six Nations squad, a 37-man squad ahead of the start of the tournament. Ireland against Wales is the opening match in the championship next month. We're very excited. RTÉ back on board as tournament media partners as well, which was officially announced in the launch this week. We also have the Champions Cup continuing and knockout places still up for grabs with the Irish promises. Delighted to be joined by Donal Lenihan, by Wes Liddy and by Bernard Jackman. Donal, we'll just start with Ireland if you don't mind, to take us out of the clubs for a bit. We've been saturated with the Champions Cup and I guess all things bad with Munster over the last while, but we have a Six Nations to look forward to. We have a 37-man squad and we have two new faces, one in particular, Mac Hansen and Mike Lowry, who I'm sure will bring a lot of excitement should they get game time, given their form for Connacht and Ulster over the past few months. But your overall thoughts on the squad, as expected, pretty much?
Very much so. Look, I think after the autumn internationals and the New Zealand game in particular, I think you've got a hard core of 25, 26 players who were nailed on. You could almost put them in a World Cup squad at this stage, given, you know, we're a year and a half out from that tournament. The exciting thing for me is there is younger talent coming through that I think has been recognised. You know, Michael Lowry, I thought, was outstanding for Ulster against Munster and followed it up with a brilliant performance against Northampton last week. Good to see the likes of Balakoon, who's been out injured, impressed during that November series, came back and again played well. Hume in the centre. I mean, Ulster, they are developing a huge cohort of homegrown backs. You know, you would have felt last week going to Northampton without McCluskey, they might struggle somewhat. So good to see those younger fellas being rewarded. I think, again, we've seen the age-old thing. Once you put up your hand in the air and say you're leaving Ireland, then that's the end of it. So Alton Delan falls out, Treadwell comes in. But look, that's the fifth lock position. I'm sure there's others would possibly put their hand up and say they might have been in the running there. O'Connor and Ulster, Maloney and Leinster. Well, Thornbury has been out in Connacht all season. So I think he could have been in the running had he been playing. But overall, I think it's a very strong squad. If you had a couple of concerns, I suppose tighthead is one, given that Andrew Porter is now nailed on as loosehead starter. The backup behind Ty Furlong, a little bit inexperienced, even though Bealham is having a good season. Tom O'Toole, 2 or 3 caps behind him. So but overall, I think it's a very strong squad. Delighted, obviously, Jack Carthy, we've spoken about him on this podcast for the last number of months. I think he's there on merit.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw the French squad being announced during the week and I went, holy Christ, look at the size and the strength of that squad. But, you know, when you go through the Irish squad and I think even the new additions as well, the likes of Lowry and Hansen, the exciting backs that we have now, the power that we have in our forwards game, I'm very confident that Ireland will go quite well in the Six Nations this year.
Yeah, and I think also from a mindset point of view, I think they'll got massive confidence from November. The style of play, the feel-good factor. I think the public are now behind the team. So I think while this is a very competitive Six Nations, probably the most competitive I can remember. I mean, I agree with you. France have got a huge amount of depth. Scotland, I think that's the best Scottish squad I've seen for a long time. England are in that mid-cycle, but where they're building for a World Cup, but yet it's full of excitement. And so I think it's going to be very difficult to win the competition. But I think that when you see the likes of Lowry, Hume, Balakoon starting to get that experience, and then as I said, you know, we know what Doris Kelleher, etc. can do, and the backup they have in the back row and a hooker. I think we're in a good place, and yeah, I'm just looking forward to seeing it all develop. And James Lowe is a big one. I mean, I just mentioned him. You know, he played the 80 minutes, so you know, you would have felt he was going to be fit. And it's interesting that we haven't tried to replace him like for like. If you think back to how we used him in November, we used his left foot as a kicking exit, but also he was coming into the line from the fullback position a lot. He was a key part of our performances in November, I felt. So it's interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see how we adapt to that in terms of tactically and whether he comes back in. I know the squad was only announced at 4:00 on yesterday, so I think they were waiting for medicals to come back. So yeah, possibly he has a muscle injury, which you said, and he'll come back in after maybe the first or second round. But he was the only real notable omission in my opinion.
Yeah, and you're right. And Wesley hasn't been replaced like for like as well. But we do have an abundance of attacking wingers now. And if you think that obviously Andrew Conway, Keith Earls still going very strong. You bring in Jordan Larmer, he's gone off the boil a bit, but we know he has potential, particularly if he's seen as a winger as well. It'll be interesting to see how to use him. Lowry coming in there, Hansen as well. Like it's not a bad bunch of backs to choose from. If you put up, if you say the strongest backline of the competition will probably be the French. And the Irish, pretty much man for man, I wouldn't say have a huge amount to be fearful of. Maybe it's scrum half, but is the exception.
I think France named a 42-man squad as well. So I wouldn't agree that our depth is comparable to theirs. I do think the squad is very strong, but yeah, I'd agree with Bernard. Like, there's no one really to replace Lowe in terms of what he gives you, that outlet with a bit of size and with that left boot as well. But I was definitely very impressed with the young Ulster backs the last few weeks, and Balakoon to me looks kind of like he's obviously been playing very well for a while, but he looks kind of transformed physically from when he first came back from Sevens. Just looks a really powerful, dynamic athlete now at this point. He's put on a bit of size without losing any agility. I don't know if that's the impact maybe of Mikey Kiley going up there to Ulster as strength and conditioning coach. I know he's very highly rated from the GA world, but yeah, look, it's a strong squad. There's not many guys you could say are unlucky to miss out. More so because the competition is so strong. But like I suppose two guys for me that definitely put their hand up, but just in a very competitive area would be, again, Jack O'Donoghue, which has been the case for a while, and probably Conor Oliver in the same boat as well. Yeah, absolutely. They've been brilliant for him. Donal, is it your understanding of and your sense of it now, the government talking this week about easing restrictions and around restaurants and pub times from next week, that because we haven't heard any noises from the IRFU about not having full stadia, we know Wales are looking at moving to England, all that kind of stuff, but is it your sense of things now that we will have a full capacity crowd at the Aviva Farms home games?
Yeah, I think so. There was talk at one stage of maybe it could be down to 75%, but I think things have moved on so quickly. I know the RFU were very bullish. Clubs, for example, all the tickets had to be distributed to the clubs around Ireland over the past, I think it was about 4 weeks ago now, and they sent out the full allocation. So I think from, a couple of weeks back, the hope at that stage was that you will have a full stadia. I think the expectation now is that you're going to have 100%. Twickenham, as we know, never closed down. Once Scotland and Wales opened up, that obviously put a little bit more pressure. But I think, look, in the wider scheme of things, I think from next Monday, we're going to see an easing in restrictions. But I think, thankfully, brilliantly, I mean, we are 90% certain that you're going to have full capacity for the opening game. I think there's no doubt, unless there was some serious setback, that for Italy and Scotland, you definitely would have 100%, but it now looks very promising for a full house. And I think it'd be brilliant. We were lucky enough to be there for the All Blacks game. The first time you had that full house in 2 years. Yeah. We're going into a third season where you could have disruption to Six Nations, which, it has taken from it in the last 2 years. No, and
financially, it has crippled the unions as well. But an IRFU cannot afford another championship without 3 home full houses, surely.
Absolutely not. Look, there's only so much government support that you can get. I know they were absolutely thrilled to have got to the point, and they thank their lucky stars, given what happened in December and the growth of the Omicron and the change in the regulations. They were absolutely thrilled with the fact that they got 3 full houses for the November internationals. That was a massive boost to the coffers. See, the problem for the RFU, no different to all the other unions, that the venture capital CVC money that came into the game, both at the provincial leagues and at the Six Nations level, that was supposed to be sort of earmarked for longer term projects. But I think that's been consumed over the past 2 years. The initial tranche of that money is gone because, you needed it to keep the game going. So, if we went through another Six Nations with having to play behind closed doors, then I think the whole financial model of the professional game would come under serious pressure. So I think the timing is a massive relief to all the unions.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And Birch, as well, you sent an article as well about just how reliant the Welsh Rugby Union is on the money that they earn from the international game, and how actually it papers over an awful lot of cracks behind the regions. And we know the crowd levels on the regions are just paltry in comparison as well. So it's crucial for the Welsh Rugby Union, and for most of them, that we do have full houses at all stadia across the championship.
Yeah, it's a big Six Nations for Wales. I mean, you know, obviously I've been in touch, living in Wales, working at Dragons. I've been sensitive to the discontent locally with rugby in Wales, but it's been papered over, camouflaged by the success the national team has kind of kept everybody quiet. But I've never seen such levels of unrest as happening now. Obviously, the regions are struggling to get good results in Europe. There's obviously big financial problems. They had to borrow 20 million, and the WRU have put that loan back on the regions. And, you know, realistically, you look at our Welsh squad, and I know they won it last year, so it's hard to write them off, but they are missing, I think, 670 caps worth of experience, with some of their key players missing. So if Wales were to have a poor Six Nations on the field, if the Principality Stadium, you know, isn't sold out, isn't buzzing, again, you know, the cash-starved regions are going to be the ones to suffer at the end of it. Because, in fairness to the WRU, they made a strategic decision to put all their money into all that private equity money into capital projects. So they're building a hotel beside the Principality Stadium. They're building a stadium roof walk, etc., with a view to having recurring revenue, you know, down the road. But yeah, that's sorry to interrupt you. That's quite telling, isn't it, Birch, that rather than invest in the regions per se, the personnel, the structures maybe behind the academies and players coming through, that the most obvious form of revenue now is in projects outside of rugby itself. Yeah. That's pretty damning, isn't it? Yeah, it is. It is damning. The way their constitution works, the domestic game, the clubs, the village rugby is ring fenced, so they can't change their funding, right? And they get quite a lot of funding. But the regions are underfunded. I mean, they've had no crowds. Their sponsorship compared to the Irish provinces would be far less. It's they feel they're not getting the support from WRU. The Welsh government has been very strict as well, which hasn't helped compared to the people, or the amount of people who are allowed to go to games in the English Premiership, etc. So it's been an avalanche of negativity, and it's going to be very interesting to see how they turn it around. I mean, Cardiff, for example, Peter Thomas, the benefactor of Cardiff, is getting back involved, and you know, they've signed Faletau, they've signed Liam Williams, they're looking for a world-class hooker. So potentially Cardiff, you know, could be the team to, I suppose, represent the Welsh regions at the highest level in the URC or in Europe. And obviously it's a capital city, so it has, you know, a bigger catchment area in terms of population, sponsorship, etc. But I would worry for the others. And there's also that debate that's been kind of running, can Wales afford 4 teams, you know? Yeah. And I know 2 years ago, there was definitely people in WRU who were pushing that Scarlets Ospreys merger.
Is that likely to happen, do you think? I mean,
I don't know. The Ospreys found a benefactor, some Hong Kong-based consortium, and they seem to have kept away from that. But look at what's going to drive those kind of decisions: finance, right? So if the regions can't wash their face, if they can't borrow any more money, something drastic will happen. And there's a lot of people, like, at that stage they wanted to push it towards a 2 super regions, which was an amalgamation of the Ospreys and the Scarlets. Cardiff to become the super regions in the east, and potentially the Dragons be moved up to North Wales, where WRU have been trying to create.
Colwyn Bay,
yeah.
Oh, right.
They fund a team up there, RGC, who play in the Premiership, and they get more funding from the WRU because it's seen as being a project. But yeah, they're talking about having a development team in the URC. But like, again, what proper competition accepts a development team? Do you know what I mean? Like, so there's massive questions to be asked. But the problem is the WRU are obviously stakeholders in the URC, so potentially they can lobby there. But again, you know, the URC is trying to get its act together. I think it's on the right track. But if we go down the route of accepting development teams, well, then we're in trouble. But look, there's lots of other things to talk about it, which are more positive.
Wes, you and I are definitely due a night out in Colwyn Bay. Any chance you're free maybe in mid-March? We get the train up, bit of break crack. There's a few nice restaurants there.
I'm all for it. It's about a 20-hour round trip by the time you factor in the different types of transport.
Yeah, no, but just look, in terms of the overall picture, before we move on from the Six Nations, then, whereas like Ireland as well, it's a year out from the World Cup, and nobody wants to get overexcited mid-cycle, because we've done that before, and look where it's got us in World Cup. But I think there's a genuine feeling of excitement around what Ireland can do with this championship. And I even think, not winning it wouldn't be a disaster, given the strength and depth of the French, given that England, the 6.0 and Reddy Jones now, we just don't know how they're going to play as well. But I think there's a genuine buzz now about this championship as well, and the potential for Ireland to make this a really good 2-year spell starting with this year.
Yeah, there definitely is. And, why wouldn't there be after the November they had? And what is it now, 8 consecutive wins?
Yeah.
But to be honest, I'm still kind of flabbergasted they produced what they did in November, because it wasn't so long ago that everything seemed quite rudderless and lacking direction, and it kind of almost seemed to click. And I don't know, I don't want to be too much of a skeptic, but there's still a part of me going, what changed so drastically there in that spell, so, but yeah. There is definitely a lot of positivity there, and rightly so, I suppose.
Yeah, rightly so. We'll get stuck into it next week, the last round of the URC next weekend before the Wales match the following week. The Champions Cup, Donald. So it looks potentially like we could have 4 Irish provinces involved in the knockout stages. I don't know what your view was on this last 16 home and away 2-legged matches as an experiment. Do you think it's something that we should maybe embrace and be a little bit excited about, given that it's very new? Or do you think the knockout straight format was one that pretty much worked all the way through, so why change it?
Well, look, as an overall concept, I much preferred the pool stages the way they were, straight into knockout, semi-final and final. I mean, one of the great Monday mornings used to be when, with a round to go in Europe, and you had the 5 tables, all printed up, points differential, number of tries scored, and you were left there working out the permutations for all the teams going into the last round. Given this new format they have, I haven't a clue what people need to do. Do you know what I mean? It's all over the place.
Well, so, it's nearly harder not to qualify than it is to qualify, Donald. I think it's sort of like kids' birthday party football. Like, everyone's the winner. Here's your gold medal. Off you go.
Exactly. Well, look, there's 16 of the 24 teams qualified. So there's some teams that have won 1 match out of 3, and they've a great chance of qualifying. I mean, I know we had an extraordinary season this year for the Champions Cup because of COVID, but like the most bizarre thing for me last week was Bristol were in a brilliant position, 7 points. They played no match. They got 5 points for a walkover and 2 points for a draw in a game that was cancelled. So 7 points, no match played. I mean, just bizarre, that type of thing. Look, I think home and away, we've never seen aggregate scores in rugby. I think as something different, it's worth having a look and see how it works out. If you have, an Irish province who goes to France and they're beaten by 12, 14 points, everybody knows what needs to be done when they come back
here
where they're playing. And you could just imagine the buzz around that. So look, I think there's merit in it. I think it was the one thing that was different that they brought into the new setup that I was really looking forward to. Because of COVID, it hasn't happened since they introduced it first. Originally, it was supposed to be at the quarter-final stage. Now it's in the last round. It's at the round of 16 stage. But as I say, look, it's just, I think the way you have the 2 pools at 12 at the moment is so convoluted. I mean, and then you have teams that play again, Wasps, for example, played Munster in the opening round. Yeah. And they arrived for the final round on Sunday in Thomond Park.
Yeah.
Munster played Cass, but Wasps didn't play Cass. Wasps played Toulouse. Do you know what I mean? So it's how you said, geez, I would say, what are they doing playing Toulouse? Where are Cass after disappearing to? But it's an anomaly. Look, I think EPCR, because of everything that has happened, because of the fallout, we've had loads of French coaches coming out saying this thing is a farce. We've seen a lot of their clubs not fielding their strongest team. A lot of the English clubs, which I find amazing, like they spend the whole season trying to qualify for Europe, and then the minute they get in there, they don't make any effort to compete in it. So it's one of these anomalies. If this is the showcase of European rugby, it has to be treated as such by every team that competes.
And is it, Donal, fair to say that this is the last season that EPCR can kind of mess about with these experimental formats. They must decide, surely, for the benefit of the tournament, so everybody knows what's happening. Here's the structure. This is the competition. This is how you qualify. This is the knockout stage. This is the last season because of COVID and all that kind of stuff that can have this experimental feel to it, surely.
Absolutely. I think a line has to be drawn. Whoever wins the Champions Cup this year, brilliant, fair dues to them, but a line has to be drawn on two fronts. Number one, the format of the tournament, because the new one just hasn't worked. It hasn't captured the imagination, and too many teams don't seem to have bought into it. The second one was, the whole, when they got rid of ERC, and that was driven by a lot of the French and the English club owners, the Bruce Craigs of this world. They were claiming that from a commercial perspective, there was so much more that could have been done that wasn't being done, and that would make it more lucrative for the clubs to be involved in this tournament. That hasn't happened. If anything, the money involved has regressed. So therefore, that also needs to be, if you want to keep the top French and English clubs engaged, you're going to have to make it, the financial rewards have to be there. And I think there should be some support, there should be some form of bonus. If you make it to the quarterfinal stage, then you get 150 or 200,000. Do you know what I mean? Reward the teams that are making progress through the tournament, but also reward them financially, because that is what will make a lot of the French and the English clubs sit up and take notice. Bear in mind, we're all under the umbrella of the IRFU. If you're the likes of Bordeaux or Toulouse or Gloucester, you have to justify your balance sheet and your financial status at the end of the season to a board and to investors. So therefore, Europe has to be far more cognizant of the financial rewards involved as a consequence.
Absolutely. And like, you just look at the Champions League model, Bert, or the Europa League model, you think back to when, Shamrock Rovers went on that run as well, or Dundalk, whatever, it's worth, hundreds of thousands to them. And it was game changing. And ultimately, at the end of the day, like, they need to employ some sort of financial incentive for the clubs and the French in particular to buy into it. Like, I know Philippe Saint-André said that, they'd so many COVID cases and they had a young backline and all that, but like, they were an absolute disgrace last weekend, as have been the French clubs. As soon as they lose interest in the tournament, there has to be a financial incentive for teams to do as well as possible every year, or it's just not going to work.
Yeah, and to be honest, there is a financial incentive for the French, but it's not to win games. It's actually to blood young players, because that's how you make money in France. Either if a player moves on from your club who's been through your academy, their value is a multiplier of the amount of years they spent in your club plus the amount of games they played. So, for example, for those bottom six clubs, in France, who are probably Challenge Cup teams, a lot of them are selling clubs or have to have an eye on how they can monetize their squad down the road if there's a financial problem. So getting those games into them. From Montpellier's point of view, they had a high number of GIF players, which is who played against Leinster, who haven't played a lot. They're not in their first choice team, but they would be needed. The way Saint-André saw that was they were getting a game in so that when they play in 3 weeks' time away to Toulouse, where he's going to get money back by basically you get a percentage of your end of season check is from the TV money in the league is based on what percentage of GIF players you've had during the year. So it's not just a case of having a minimum. So if you have to have a minimum of 16, if you can get to 16.4, 16.5, 16.6, you get more of the check. So what he was doing was he was prioritizing his GIF players so that down the road he can throw them in, and obviously have an opportunity that they've had a match practice, which is bananas for the Premier competition in Europe. But that's just the reality of it. So for sure, the only way, even for the super rich clubs like Racing and Montpellier with big benefactors, the only way to change their attitude is to make it financially attractive for them. So I totally agree with Don.
Yeah, and Wes, like, the only way they can get, I guess, more financial incentives and offer more money, I'm talking about the competition and the organisers here, is to get more brand sponsorship, to get more out of the likes of Heineken to come in and offer to sponsor the tournament, perhaps the TV rights deal as well. I know obviously it's with BT at the moment. I know there's interest as well from the likes of Amazon and elsewhere. But ultimately, they just need more money in this tournament if they're going to keep the French interested, and the English as well to a certain degree. We love it in Ireland, but it's easy for us to say.
Yeah, and like maybe more private investment, and like maybe ultimately probably ceding a bit of control to attract that in terms of how the tournament's laid out and how that can be sold to broadcasters. But I mean, I think 3 French teams the weekend made 15 changes from their most recent domestic game. Toulouse lost a pool match for the first time in 2 years, despite playing against pretty average Wasp team who were down to 14 men. So there's no doubt that the interest isn't there. But luckily, I think the best teams will still qualify for the last 16, and it will probably take on a life of its own at that point, hopefully. But I'd agree with Donal. I hadn't even thought of it till he said it there. But that kind of scrambling to figure out the pool permutations at the end of every season was one of the huge kind of novelties of the tournament and something that made it very entertaining. And you've certainly lost that when 8 of 12 teams are qualifying out of a pool.
What did you make of Connacht, Wes, last week? I know Andy Farrell said it was the most disappointing result given they had the game by the scruff of the neck, and to lose it in the circumstances that they did. It was a brilliant match to watch, obviously. They travelled to Stade on Sunday, still in a position to qualify. I think they need to get just a point from the game to book their place in the knockout stages. But Connacht, for me, are fast becoming one of the best talking points of Irish rugby at the moment. I love the way, even though they lost the game, they threw it away, but I love the way they play. I love what they're doing. We've spoken about them numerous times this season already, but there's something really great happening in the West at the moment, and I'd love to see them get through to the last 16.
Yeah, they've definitely been very entertaining, but I mean, I'd hold on with something really great happening and all that. They lost a match they absolutely shouldn't have lost from a completely position of control. So, like, all the talk has been about, what a heartbreaking defeat, which it was, but I don't know how they let that one slip, really, to be honest.
Stop playing, I think. They just stopped playing. I don't know, whatever.
I still wouldn't be convinced Leicester are real contenders in terms of winning the tournament outright either. I don't know if any of the English teams are. Maybe Quins, but it's hard to, with the lack of interest of some teams, it's hard to pick out a huge list of contenders. So I think like with the position all the Irish provinces are in, I think they all have a good chance of, if not winning it, certainly going pretty deep into the competition. And I wouldn't exclude Connacht from that. I think over 2 legs with the sports ground, I think they can put it up to almost anyone that will be left.
Yeah, and Ulster as well, Donal, at home to Claremont. Obviously, they're in a decent position as well after the pool stages, so they'll go through. Leinster have it within their own hands, despite that the result that went against them early on in the tournament, and they play Bath, who they'll probably wallop as well. So look, I mean, the Irish province is looking pretty good.
Yeah, they certainly are. Look, I think, 2 are qualified. You can take it as nailed that Leinster will be. I mean, Bath have been appalling. I mean, their fall from grace is unbelievable. So, I mean, you saw the frustration in the Leinster performance. I mean, that 28-0 against Montpellier really stuck in there great. And you got to admire the way Leinster just kept their foot to the pedal throughout the whole. Like, scoring more than a point a minute is a very difficult thing to do. And you're talking about a team that were 4th in the top 14 in France. Now, look, we know about all those young fellas that Bert says, but it's not an optional extra that you tackle. Do you know what I mean? You're a professional rugby player. I mean, right from the outset, they were just awful. So, look, Leinster will be there. Munster qualified as well, but that'll be an interesting game on Sunday. Wasps, they've had an unbelievable couple of 18 months with just injury after injury. And, I mean, whatever about the merits of Toulouse last week, I mean, you beat Leicester one Saturday, you beat Toulouse the following Saturday. And they look to me like a pretty united group there in Wasps. I saw the game against Leicester, just the emotion on them, given everything they went through, was huge. And I think that's going to be an interesting game on Sunday. As I say, they'll be far stronger than they were, as will Munster, of course, in that opening game. So it'll be interesting to see that one.
Just on Munster then, and while we have, gents, I want to play a clip here of Stephen Larkham. He has been out in front of the media this week. A little bit frustrated and tetchy, as you would hear. Michael Glennon spoke to Stephen and asked him if he was bemused by any of the criticism, given Munster have won 4 of their last 5 games. This is what he had to say.
Well, I think you've got to be probably a little bit more specific in terms of that commentary. I mean, there's positive and negative commentary. Some of those games we weren't happy with. If you look at our previous 4 games, some of those games, some of the passages in those 4 games haven't been great. And we put our hand up and said that we need to be better. I'd say other games, the referee has made some questionable decisions that has made it very difficult for us to get a bit of a roll on. And then more recently, I think we've had a couple of really good passages and a couple of really good performances. Probably the score didn't reflect how well we played in the last couple of games, I feel.
I suppose maybe more specifically that what we would have seen from Munster over the last 10 years and before your time was that a certain style of play, once it came up to a semi-final or a final, wasn't really enough to even trouble the other teams that they played with. Is it too late in the day in terms of yourself and Johan to adapt or to increase the variety within your play in terms of getting to a semi-final and landing more of a blow than in the last few years?
It's an interesting question. I guess when you ask that question and when you sort of see some comments like that, you have to question, what are you seeing in our game that's not in our game at the moment? What do you think is hurting us or is not strong enough? I'll ask you that question first. Like, what is it that you feel that we're not doing well enough?
Yeah, well, I'm only a civilian, but maybe Donal Lenihan was saying in his column that there needs to be more strings to the bow, that if you spend 3/4 of the season kicking so much ball, when it comes to a team that's able to match up, that doesn't put a dent in them.
Yeah, okay. I think you've got to be realistic when you look at our game, and know that we're not the team that kicks the most in most games. I know we've been criticised for kicking too much in the past, but the stats just don't add up. We feel we've got a very balanced game. We play the game that we want to play. We feel that when there's an opportunity on the table, we'd like to think that we're going to take those opportunities. I think that we've got a very sound game. I think we've been improving. I've spoken to you guys a couple of times this year, and this season, and I feel that we've definitely improved, and we're still improving. We're looking for improvement every week. There's certain elements, and some weeks, like I said before, some weeks the game just doesn't come together because of the conditions or the referee, or different circumstances. But we certainly have enough variety in our game. Yeah. I could probably answer all of those specific questions. When you just talk generally that we haven't got the best game, I think that's misinformed.
Okay, so that's Stephen Larkham there. Donald Birch, I know you wrote about him in the Munster in the Sunday Independent as well. Keith Wood has been quite vocal. Ronan O'Gara, Tony Ward, all speaking out against the style that Munster have been employed over the last while. Larkham says he wants you guys to engage more in more constructive dialogue. When you ask that question, you see some of the comments like that, you'd have to ask, what are they seeing in our games at that moment? So, Donald, what are you seeing? Munster are brilliant to watch. They're fantastic rugby. And Stephen Larkham is a genius of a coach. You have this all wrong here.
Well, you weren't at the match in Thomond Park, the Cascade. I mean, that was the last game when you had a massive crowd and there was an expectation there. I mean, what we were witnessing, that the quality of the rugby was just awful. And look, yeah, Larkin can say to it what he wants. I mean, he's the attack coach. I mean, the litmus test for me, and I referenced it in my own piece in the Examiner yesterday. I've been there since the very first game the Munster played against Swansea on a Wednesday night in Thomond Park back in 1995. I've seen the vast majority of the games. I've seen all the pain they went through between 1999 and 2006 when they won the tournament. All through that period, the support from the general public. And let's be honest, this whole Munster movement, like what happened between 1999 and 2008 when fans from all different backgrounds, primarily GA people, got sucked into following Munster. It was a movement. The heartbreak sort of solidified everyone in their support for the team. There was never a dissenting voice. I was away in games in France when Munster lost. They didn't play the most attractive rugby, but they left everything on the field and people accepted that. But rugby has moved on. Professional sport has been moved on. And I have been, I won't say shocked, but I've been amazed by the amount of people down here that have come up to me and said, God, Munster are just shocking to watch. I mean, last Monday morning, I was actually writing my piece, having a coffee somewhere, came across 3 lads who, from probably an older generation than me, but they were all involved in rugby. A lot of them played rugby, and you know, they're just massive rugby fans, and their heads were down. One of them said, "Look, I can't watch Munster. I love Connacht for the reasons that you're saying."
Yeah.
So I mean, you've got to be cognizant of your support base. I mean, and look, again, I just referenced it in that piece last weekend. Ulster, Connacht, Leinster all got 4-try bonuses. It is the positivity of the games. Watching those games and watching Munster on Friday night, the first thing what sticks out like a mile is just the tempo of the games. Connacht, Leinster and Ulster played at a much different tempo. That Ulster Northampton game was a brilliant game, million miles an hour. No, I don't. Rugby, you know, the strengths and weaknesses of different teams. Like, I was never a critic of Joe Schmidt during his period in Irish rugby because he maximised what Ireland had. He got Ireland played in a way that made them superior in key areas to other teams. You don't have to replicate what everyone else is doing. You have to maximise the strengths of what you have and use that to your benefit. I personally don't believe that Munster are maximising the strengths of what they have. I think the backline that they have, there is so much more capability within that. When you see Andrew Conway getting one pass, you see Andrew Conway never plays a bad game. He's probably the only Munster starter against the All Blacks last November. But he gets one pass a game. You know, so that is what drives people bananas. And plus the realization, and you know, I'm sick in the teeth from saying this, if you keep on playing that way, you will be in the quarterfinals and you could possibly be in the semi-finals, but that's it. And if that is the sum of your ambition, then that's the, you know.
And it does seem to be accepted that there is a ceiling on Munster the way they play. There's a ceiling burst that will get them so far, but not anywhere further. Either Stephen Larkham is wrong in what he's saying, and you're all wrong, you know, and everybody who's writing about it is wrong, or else there's a serious problem here. The consensus seems to be, Bert, that everyone else can see what's happening in front of them, bar the people who are in charge of the Munster team at the moment.
Well, look at it. So obviously he's annoyed about the criticism, but as pundits, if we don't call it as we see it, we're not pundits, we're fans, right? You know, maybe he wants us all to be fans and that'd be easier. But the reality is, even some of the things he said. So basically, I know we've been criticized for kicking too much in the past, but the stats don't just add up, right? So I went looking at the stats. Okay, so official stats in this year's URC, only the Ospreys and the Dragons have kicked more on average per game than Munster, right? In this year's European Cup, the Champions Cup, Leicester, Bordeaux and Connacht have all kicked more on average than Munster, but nobody else. Now, what's the key common denominator there in that group? Leicester, right? So Leicester, with Steve Borthwick, have set their stall out. We want to play territory. So they refused to play in their own half. And hence, if Bordeaux and Connacht played against them, they obviously had a choice. They either run it back or kick it back. So that's very unique to one team having a clear policy. Now, Leicester are winning games. Leicester are able to score good tries off set piece attack. They're able to score good tries off counter attack because they've got a very good set piece. They've got a very good kicking game. Okay, through Ben Youngs, George Ford, etc. They're finding space and they're able to put the squeeze on teams. They've won, and as I said, they've got a better balance to their game, I feel, than Munster. There's nothing wrong with playing a high percentage kicking game, but just look at the Castaway game the other night. They were chasing the game, okay, and Cast obviously were trying to play territory, and Munster kept box kicking back. But it wasn't like the box kicking that we saw in Ulster against Northampton, where Batacloon was going up and winning the ball. I would say the kick chase was poor, and if you actually think about the break that led to John Hodnett's. The phase of play that led to John Hodnett's break, which eventually gave Munster the field position to score. Actually, from a box kick, Cast broke the line and we're on the counter attack and we're heading into 22, and they probably got too excited and threw an offload which went to ground, and that gave Munster the opportunity to break away through John Hodnett. So if they were playing a box kicking game where they were winning the ball back in the air, or they were arriving at the same time as the ball and counter-hooking and getting turnovers, I could see the logic to that. But it seems as if they have this pattern of play without the obvious, next layer to make it effective. Saracens won European Cups and Premiership through having a high kicking game. I'm not anti-kicking at all. I just think there's certain times where you have to show a little bit more. And, we saw them against Connacht away where they were spent, 5 minutes on the Connacht line just before half time. No creativity, you know what I mean? And it wasn't that to do with kicking there. So, first of all, he says that we're wrong about our stats. We're not far wrong, you know what I mean? And Munster
I was doing the match, and you're right, Munster, I've written down here in my notes, Munster have kicked the ball 27 times on average per game in the URCs this season, the third highest average behind the Dragons and the Ospreys. That's fact.
And I'm not anti-kicking at all. I think you can have a really exciting kicking game, and you can use a kicking game to your advantage. But it's like, it's like what we've heard from Matt Field, that apparently Johan said, look, he signed Snyman and Jenkins. He can't play the power game. What can he do? Well, you could have a different plan. You know what I mean? You could actually vary. It's like, Kerry footballers missing two midfielders. Would they change their tactics? You would imagine that they potentially talk about it or look at it. So, and also Stephen Larkham was brought into Munster to fix their attack. So if Munster's attack has been brilliant, why did they need Stephen Larkham? And what has moved on? So as I said, it's back to being a pundit. If we're not balanced, fair enough, then criticize us. But I think I certainly feel that I'm saying it based on what I've seen, and the stats on this occasion do back us up. But it's not all about stats. But when people on the street aren't enjoying watching Munster play, there's a problem.
Who is the famous GAA coach, Wes, who said, we have plan A, we don't have plan B. If we have to go to plan B, we're fucked. I can't remember who said it, but it's one of the famous lines. Munster have plan A, they don't have plan B at the moment. And I think that's pretty obvious for everyone to see.
Yeah, I don't think that's as uncommon as you make out, though. Like, Stephen Larkham's wrong in what he's saying because the stats bear it out. I mean, that seems pretty obvious. But, 5 minutes ago, you were lauding Connacht for throwing away a 20-point lead at home.
We're not.
No, you did. You did.
Well, I'd much rather support Connacht playing the way they are, should have won the game, right, than support a team that went to Castor again on Friday night and again at home before Christmas and played the way Munster are playing. It's chalk and cheese for me. And you're right in what you're saying. They still lost the match, and I accept that. But there's more potential in what Connacht are doing than what Munster do.
But Birch said a minute ago, as long as there's balance. And the only reason I can see Larkham's frustration, aside from self-interest and trying to justify his own job, is they did go and win a game, on the road with a score in the last few minutes. They're in a very good position in the group. There were positives in 5 or 6 guys under 22, 23 playing at that level, in Jack Crowley playing his first game in Europe. So I wouldn't throw everything out. And I thought there was more endeavour last Friday than there was against Castor the previous round, for sure. But, I don't know why we're surprised that they're playing this way. They've been doing it for a number of years. They have a South African head coach who's heavily influenced by South African ideas and what won him the most recent World Cup. It's just not going to change. I'm not saying I don't want it to change, but it's not going to change. This will be what will happen for the rest of the season. It's what's happened for the last number of seasons. I'd be more concerned in a big picture about something like if you saw it announced that Jason Jenkins is moving on the end of the season, they basically paid him a couple of $100,000 to get physio for the year for the most part, which it happens, people get injured. But when you look at the cost combined of, say, him, Snyman, one or two others, and you look at the restructuring of the competition this season, that, until the COVID cancellations in South Africa, URC windows weren't going to clash with international windows. You're kind of thinking, is there a need for a 45, 46-man squad anymore? Is there a merit in cutting back one of those overseas signing and putting that into development projects? I think when people talk about the director of rugby job, I'd much rather see them concerned with those kind of issues than with anything to do with the first team.
But would you accept
just quickly, sorry, Hugh. The reason we don't compare Connacht to Munster, and the reason we're probably more excited about what they're doing, is we understand their limitations, budgetary-wise, history-wise. I mean, if Munster want to be compared to Connacht, well, then that's the starting problem. I mean, you know, Connacht are made up of fellas like Keane Prendergast was let go by Leinster Academy. Paul Boyle didn't make it in Leinster. Gavin Thornbury has had a circuitous route to professional rugby.
So both sides are made up of guys that didn't make it in Leinster. Then is what we're saying.
Both sides are made. Well, no, I'm not. Well, maybe Munster have had some players that didn't make it in Leinster, but Munster should have higher expectations. And as look at the resources they have. I mean, you know, if they should be looking for trophies. That's where Munster.
As a coach, Bert, would you not be excited if you were offered the Munster job and you came in this summer? Would you not be hugely excited by the talent that Munster have at their disposal right now? And would you not be saying to yourself, I can get more out of this bunch of players than what we have seen over the last 2 years? I certainly would be, and I'm not a coach.
Well, look, Munster have huge potential. Munster have huge potential. They have something unique.
That's the key, isn't it?
They absolutely. So, and again, the barometer for them is trophies. And if as soon as they start looking to say, oh, you know, we're being harshly judged, etc., well, then they've already lost the battle. They should judge themselves on trophies. Obviously, the trophy cabinet is pretty barren, and you know, at some stage that's got to be fixed. And I said last week, I don't think it's just the coaches. I think the senior player group there, you know, haven't done enough to have short-term success at certain times. And you know, it's a shared. The whole organization has to judge itself and winning trophies. And you know, feeling sensitive about criticism is irrelevant. It's what they're doing on the field, off the field, to make sure that they're winning Europe. That's how I see it. Connacht are going to struggle to win Europe. You know what I mean? Let's be honest. It'll take a while. It'll take a while, and that's why you know, they maybe get a fair crack from pundits. Plus, they're playing an attractive brand of rugby. But the reality is, I think that's why Munster are being judged harshly, because they deserve to be judged harshly, because they are one of the best teams in Europe, potentially.
Yeah,
it's Hugh. The best thing that's happened to Munster this year, they've won the 3 matches in Europe, and the best thing that has happened, they've 18 and possibly 19 players have made debuts in Europe. And a lot of those guys, I would know the vast majority of them because they've come through the schools and the club system. They've played in the All-Ireland League, and as a consequence of that, you see them and you know there's massive potential there. I'm not saying that all 18 of those lads will go on to be Heineken Cup players with Munster, but a fair percentage of them will. So there is a lot of hope for the future. There are structural issues that need to be addressed off the field, and the things that Bernard is alluding to there. And unless you get those things right as an organisation, then you're not going to get the maximum return out of what you have. And the Jason Jenkins ones, I was reading this morning, that he's likely to go to Leinster. I think this guy will be a huge success in Leinster because I think he's a very good rugby player. There was huge turmoil down here when they signed him to replace CJ Stander, because they were trying to tell us he was a back row forward who could play a bit in the second row. In my opinion, he's the other way around. He is a second row who can play a bit in the back row. So they were, again, just trying to fool the public. And given the younger fellas that were in there, at that stage you had Snyman and you had John Klein and all these guys. So that is why there was a sort of a huge turn-off to the fact that they had another South African guy coming in, taking up a young lad's place. But the irony for me is this guy is a very good player. He's a very good second row. And I think could possibly that this guy will add hugely to the Leinster makeup, because I think he's probably what they need if and when he arrives there next year. But I would be far more enlightened by the younger guys that are coming through in Munster, by all this sort of short-term hassle. Like, the bottom line is there's going to be change. We are going to have a new coach. We are going to have a new structure, be it a director of rugby or be it a head coach in Munster next year. And I do certainly think there is talent there. Certainly that when you get that you can offer more than what they're doing at the moment. And that is where the frustration is with people down here at present. And I think we should draw a line on it at this stage. We've flogged the thing to death. and just see what happens over the next
See what happens. And as they say, when you're explaining, you're losing. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Obviously, last round of the Champions Cup this weekend. So Connacht are away to Stade. Leinster play Bath. It's Claremont coming to Ulster and Munster Wasps on Sunday. We'll review it all next week in the company of the lads. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you then.
The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.